Hi guys, welcome to episode 13 of Maniacs, and this episode is entitled Abuse of Power. And in this episode, I'm going to actually be talking about the events that led up to me resigning my position at World Harvest Church as the HR director, and also the actual resignation, what led up to the resignation, and then show what happened, basically after I gave my resignation and how it was received, perceived, and then discussed to a certain extent in other meetings, almost as a manipulation tactic, in my opinion. But you, again, can judge for yourselves on how that was being handled. So a little backstory, and again, just some information, that has happened since I'm recording this episode. So obviously, a couple of my recordings, the audio and video, did end up getting some attention, and it's being shared exponentially. So I think that, that helps in getting the word out on what is actually happening at World Harvest Church, especially behind closed doors. But as you saw even in last week's episode, Pastor Parsley and is so brazen, and his daughter even as well, so brazen at times that there is a just complete unrecognition of what's happening around, that they can behave how they want, and if people are watching it or listening, it doesn't really matter. And I think that, this is shedding light that that's not exactly the case. But I think it also shows that people are so fearful and so intimidated that they are willing to sacrifice themselves at being caught because they have chosen to record some of these meetings and some of these interactions. And, I've done the same because it's so outlandish that you don't even believe that people would believe you if you said it without proof. And it's such an unfortunate position for people to be in, especially when they believe that they're doing God's work and they're doing what the Lord has called them to do, and then they find themselves in positions where they're so fearful and intimidated that they won't speak up, and that they've now been put in positions where they have to record things that are happening because they just don't believe that anyone is going to listen to them. So this episode is going to just show that even more. I believe that this is where people's minds are regardless of their position within the organization, and that it then shows a trickle down effect, and people are continuing to be mistreated, and especially mistreated very badly behind closed doors. And at some point it's got to stop. So is that the people that are in charge actually changing their behavior, or do people finally say enough is enough? This is not what God intended me to endure while I'm trying to actually do his work. And so I'm going to get started. Like other people, I because I'm in HR, I take a lot of notes. I make sure that I date things and give good note taking so that if I have to reference these things, I can do that. But I also was very, very inclined to do it at World Harvest because I thought that, it could come back at some point where I needed to reference these notes, and I didn't want to try to remember what happened, but also that, I didn't want things to be twisted around even on me, because I knew all of, the particular goings-ons behind the scenes, and I didn't want it to, for myself not to take the appropriate actions that I needed to take, so that, if it did come back on me, that I could reference these notes and have proof that things happened the way that they happened, because, I not only took good notes, but I have other proof of it as well. So leading up to my actual resignation, I had been constantly in prayer about a new opportunity, because, I did need this job. I was a single mom and 2 boys, and I really needed to be able to provide for them. So I unfortunately understood and still understand what some people, where their position is within the organization, because they possibly don't have a lot of opportunities coming their way. And if they do, they're probably quickly shot down as soon as the Parsleys find out about it, because they do have a lot of connections. And I can assure you that they do badmouth people to other ministries, and these other ministries are then reluctant to either even give people an interview, or, they're just not interested in them whatsoever. And I don't know if that's an allegiance to the Parsleys themselves, if they receive, money and gifts to do this. I don't know what that looks like, but I do know that it happens, and I was in a position, unfortunately, like that. So when I actually gave my resignation to World Harvest, I did not have another job, but I felt so strongly, and you're going to see why. So I don't want this to drag on for too long, because there is a lot of moving pieces and parts to this, but want to make sure that I give you a good overview of what this all looked like, this situation. So anyone that works the ministry schedule, which was not me because I did not go to church there, but anyone that worked the ministry schedule, their days off were supposed to be Saturdays and Mondays, because they were at church on Sundays, and then they worked an extra long day on Wednesdays because they were there throughout the day, and then they stayed then into the evening for the evening service. And I came in on a Monday in September, and I was one of really the only people in the office on Mondays, but there were a few people back there in A Wing along with me. And someone that attends church at World Harvest actually asked if they could come and meet with me. And I was very shocked, because, usually I'm dealing with staff members only, or people that are actually looking for a job to work there. And so they came and spoke with me, and basically they were also very fearful that it would come out who they are, and I assured them that I would keep their information confidential, and until this day that information has still stayed confidential. And they came to me and said that they were in church and they were very disturbed because they saw my boss hit and pinch one of the other staff members during the church service on Sunday. And as you can imagine, here's notes, pages and pages of notes from these meetings to make sure that I had my information straight, and that I was going to be able to then go and have another conversation. And so I did let this person know that although I was going to keep their information confidential, that I did have to address this, because abusing people, regardless of what avenue that you take, it's wrong in the first place. But then, when you start putting your hands on people, and you are, verbally berating and abusing them in front of other people, this, is definitely crossing a line. It should have already crossed the line for me. And I think to a point it did, but I was also, kind of brainwashed and also in a position where I needed to provide for my family. And so I was scared, that's definitely a human and fleshly feeling, but I definitely was scared. And so I was kind of towing the line and just staying in prayer that the Lord would either restore the situation at World Harvest, or he would release me from it. And ultimately he released me. So after having this conversation and getting as many details as I could, the next day was a Tuesday. And so everyone was back in the office, but that's service planning. And so that ultimately, the service planning meetings ultimately take up almost the entire day. And so now we're to Wednesday, and looks like Wednesday, September 28th. And my boss had come down to my office because we had just interviewed some candidates via Zoom. And she came down to my office to discuss it. And even the things that were said during that conversation were pretty crazy, as far as, she said, "Can you tell the recruiter that we need some diversity? All they have sent us is black candidates, and that is going to be a hard sell to the Parsleys." I reminded her that they had sent us 2 Caucasian candidates and 2 Hispanic candidates, and she said, "Oh yeah." And I'm just throwing that in there because, again, I feel like a lot of these conversations kind of leave me with my jaw on the floor, especially now that I go back and read it, because I think there was a part of me that was probably also desensitized like some of the other people. And then when I go back and read it, I'm like, oh my gosh, people are really saying this stuff out loud. So, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase some of this, but I'm going to read as much of the notes that I can, because, this is legitimately how it went down. So I then asked her to come in my office and shut my door, and she was like, "Is everything okay?" And I said, "Well, I don't want anyone else, to hear this conversation, and I want to ask you some questions." And so I told her it wasn't very comfortable for me, but that I did have to ask her about it. And so I told her about the church member that came into my office and wanted to speak with me. And then I asked her, "Did you hit and pinch the staff member at church?" And she said, "Well, what do you mean? I didn't punch her in the face. But yes, I was hitting her to hurry up and get stuff up in service." Now, quick, caveat here for this. Everyone that works the Sunday service is under tremendous pressure, whether you see it or you don't see it on stage, or whether you feel it when you're in that tabernacle. Everyone is. So from the people that are on stage singing to the people that are in the media department that are trying to get, the sermon notes up on the screen, to what's being shown on the screen behind Pastor Parsley or whoever is talking. This is a very high stress environment, and to the point where people are so stressed and so worried about they themselves being yelled and screamed at and maybe hit, I don't know, that they're willing to perpetuate this behavior so that they don't actually look bad. Okay. So after she said, I was hitting her to hurry up and get stuff up in service, she says, "This happens every Sunday. Why would someone just now be saying something?" And she goes on to say, "I cannot believe someone hasn't complained about me already and how I talk to people, because that is where I'm really not nice." And I explained to her that it was my duty to ask her and not accuse her, but ask her if she had done these things, and that it was very uncomfortable. Also, because, she's my boss, but that I had to. And I went on to say that the disrespect is so prevalent and normal that no one even recognizes how wrong it is anymore. Also, the culture is so fear-based that people are afraid to speak up because they don't want to lose their job or be treated even worse. And she said, okay, I get it. But she also minimized her own actions. And I assured her in the conversation that the person that told me about this happening was not the person that it happened to, but in fact a church member that had seen all of this happen. And I also told my boss that I was worried about her, because even though she said that it happened every Sunday, I did feel like it was out of character for her and signified to me that she was stressed and overwhelmed and possibly also being treated very badly. And she just kind of left my office, I think shocked and a little flabbergasted, but it was, it seemed to be a genuine response, but also a response like, what's going to happen, with this if people find out. But again, it seemed to be kind of commonplace. So I was very unsatisfied with the discussion. I did end up meeting with the staff member that it happened to. She, admitted that this in fact happened, and it was not the first time, and that she wanted to make sure that they knew that she was not the one reporting this, and she was very fearful that something was going to happen to her. She did not want me to say anything, and I explained to her that I had to say something. So after all of this happening, I was still very unsatisfied with this and just trying to stay in prayer, because it not only affected me just on the human side, but it also affected me because it was very triggering for me of things that I had experienced, and it just made my heart hurt for the people that I knew were enduring a lot of these things and felt powerless and felt like they couldn't say anything. And so I continued to pray, but I just knew that my time there was over, and I just felt it in my spirit. And so on October 5th, and we'll show a copy of this, but I'm going to read it as verbatim as I can. On October 5th of 2022, I did submit my resignation. And, usually when people resign from World Harvest Church, and probably from any, very abusive and toxic workplace, they are as nice as they can be in the resignation letter, because they want, them to give them a good reference, and they don't want to leave on bad terms, and they just don't want to put their issues actually in writing in black and white. And that wasn't the approach that I took, because at this point, again, I was so upset with what had transpired, especially because the person that had been hit and hit and pinched in this service was not only a colleague and someone that I cared about deeply from that level, but she was also my friend outside of work, and I think her and her family are wonderful. And so I just was having a lot of issue with this. And so I did put in writing, and again, we'll show a copy of that with a few things blacked out, just to protect myself and protect them to a certain extent. But If you work there, you know who all of our bosses are. So in my resignation letter, I say, it is with my deepest regret that I must resign from my role as the HR director of World Harvest Church, Harvest Preparatory School, and Valor Christian College. It was brought to my attention on September 27th, 2022, that you, my boss, physically corrected a staff member in a church service. I questioned you about it the very next day, where you not only admitted to it, but minimized the interaction and said it happened every Sunday. Furthermore, you said that you could not believe that someone hasn't complained about your verbal interactions because that is where you can be extremely mean. I am not only upset and disappointed, but I am hurting personally and feel convicted to stand up for what is right, regardless of the fact that it is literally my job to do so. I cannot, in good conscience, continue to recruit people to work here and that may or may not be subjected to verbal and physical abuse. Please accept this as my 4-week notice. My last day will be Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022, unless you choose to release me early. I will do my absolute best to find and trade my replacement and tie up any loose ends. Well, the 4 weeks didn't last. I actually ended up leaving in the, I ended up leaving in October. Sorry, I was confused on the date for a second. And did end up leaving in October, and they didn't want me to completely work out my notice. Did not find my replacement or train my replacement. And in fact, I think they went a period of time without an HR director because this was almost 2 years ago at this point. So then after, I submitted this, we are also going to show you a text message that I received from my boss. Now, to give you a little context between the issue happening and me actually resigning, I had been in a car accident and had not gone to the hospital right away because I didn't really think anything was wrong with me, but subsequently ended up going on this date, October 5th, and found out that I did have a concussion. But after this meeting, I received a text message, and again, we're going to show it with a couple, maybe a couple of things blacked out. She says, I apologize that you're in this situation and state of turmoil because of my actions. I really hope that you will choose to stay and allow us to work through the challenges that you brought to me today. And I also want to make sure you know I only asked you to leave my office because I was sobbing and I couldn't control myself to not break down any longer. I hope you got out of the office and find some rest. If you need anything with getting to urgent care or need dinner, please let me know. And, very, very kind message. And because, she can be kind, and so can a lot of other people. They can also be kind. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, they seem to be more concerned about protecting their reputation and protecting how people view them rather than how they actually treat people. Because again, just on the humanistic side of this, we are not supposed to be hurting people, whether it's verbally or physically or mentally, emotionally, financially, sexually, any of those things. We're not supposed to be abusing people, especially, behind closed doors, because we don't think anybody is going to find out about it. But again, to be so brazen that you do this thing, you treat people this way in public for everyone to see, I think that also says something about how long you've been doing it, the fact that you have no accountability, and that you have gone unchecked for so long that you think that you can do whatever and say whatever, and that it's not going to be exposed or challenged, or that people are not going to be upset with how you're behaving. And, there's plenty of Bible verses on exposing false teachers and exposing people that are in these positions of power, and they take advantage of people and they literally abuse their power, and then they go out and pretend that they're something that they're not. So I ended up leaving the office that day. Again, went to urgent care. I got a concussion. I'm out of the office. The doctor said for 5 days because the screens were really exacerbating the issues I was having with the concussion that I didn't know that I had. But one of the most troubling parts of all of this, and obviously the fact that staff members are physically being corrected, that's an issue all in itself, and definitely the biggest issue here. But one of the other main issues that came up, and again, we're going to show this because this is directly from a Friday service planning recap meeting. So Tuesdays, they have the service planning meetings that kind of go all day long. And then on Fridays, they have like a recap meeting, and that's where they go over, everything that had been discussed on Tuesday. How are things going for service on Sunday? What needs to be planned? Those sorts of things. And there's always someone in this meeting, whether they're physically there or they're on speakerphone, and because there is not to be any recording, which obviously there are still people recording because they're so fearful that people are not going to believe them that these things are actually happening. But someone is there to not only take notes during the meeting, but then transcribe them, and then these notes then go out to all of the members of the meeting. And you'll see that there's only, initials being used, and they're not writing out the full names, but the ones that I'm sure that will jump out to you initially is RP, obviously Rod Parsley, ABP, Ashton Parsley, and then, the other people are people that sit in those meetings day in and day out, but not necessarily in front of the camera. So before I get to the actual excerpt that is speaking about HR and the events that happened after I gave my resignation. So put my resignation in writing on 10/5/2022. This meeting is 10/7/2022. So one of the first things that you'll see is Rod Parsley is saying, one of the most frustrating things to do is for people to act like they are more intelligent than me, because I promise you that's not the case. And if you've seen episode 2 and episode 12, it just continues the fact that people are being berated and belittled and embarrassed in meetings. Whether they're outside or inside, it's happening. People are recording it because they don't believe that anyone is going to believe them. But there are also, I would call them intimidation tactics, bullying tactics, if you will, that are happening when it's not necessarily being recorded. And so what he then says is, I don't care if you put on MMA gloves and go at it. My job is not to fix it all. I'm sitting here. I can't get a flag sign replaced in less than 3 weeks. Everyone wants to run to HR, and it's such an environment around here. I'll go ahead and add, HR is not the place for you to gossip. If you have something to say, be person enough to go to them. Okay, well, what happens when people go to you, Rod Parsley? Okay, they get abused and yelled at and screamed at and berated and belittled even before coming to you, but how do they even get a meeting with you? Okay, Rod Parsley and Ashton Parsley are kind of untouchable, especially within the church. They're using aliases so people don't know that they're commenting on things. People are asking for meetings, they can't get them, because, maybe they're so busy, I don't know. But it looks like more of, continuing to critique everyone and, walk around and make sure everybody has their, nose to the grindstone and working and that, time is spent on picking these things apart rather than actually dealing with the issues. And so in me resigning from my position, and again, I was there almost 4 years, I had several increases, and as you already heard, at least my boss did not want me to leave. Now, was that because she was worried about the Parsleys hearing about what actually happened and involved her? Or was it, they already knew and they liked having me there because, I smoothed a lot of the things over, especially with the staff members, even though I feel like I was always very honest. I tried to be loving and kind to them always, and they were always struggling on whether God really wanted them to stay there or not and continue to endure the things that they were enduring. But now, people are coming and gossiping in HR, for goodness sakes, which, by the way, was not happening. People were coming to me because they trusted me. They knew that if I said it was going to stay confidential, that it would. And if it couldn't stay confidential, as you already heard, I was very honest about that and said, I will try to keep as many details as possible confidential, but I still do have to say something. And I was not going to risk my professional reputation for people that did not even value human beings, let alone fellow Christians and fellow colleagues, that to have enough respect for them and love for them. And just on a human side, not even, bringing in how the Bible talks about we're supposed to treat and love people, but just from a humanistic side, how can we treat people like this, and what kind of power tripper are these people on that they feel like it's okay to treat people in this way, and then berate them even further and saying, stop going to HR to gossip. That's not what was happening. And I don't know what people are doing now, but I can certainly tell you that that was not the case. So I did, end up leaving, and my time was cut a little bit short there, and it was one of the best decisions that I ever made. As soon as I left and was out of there, I did receive another job offer, and my life just became exponentially happier and more full of joy, even though I still was reeling on the inside for my friends that continue to work there and still continue to work there. But I knew that I had a lot of healing to do, and it took me probably about 8 months from leaving there to realize everything that I had endured and everything that people were enduring. And like I said, before, I tried to just put this all behind me. I tried to be, not be the one that was exposing World Harvest Church and what was actually happening there. And, I couldn't run away from God. I could not run away from what I knew to be true and knew to be right. And that was ultimately, what started the podcast and continues the podcast. And I'm going to read a couple of Bible verses like I always do. But I will also just, throw in that the person that, was actually the focal point of this story, as far as the person that was punched or, hit and pinched in service, she did end up staying long after I left, and I don't believe that she works there anymore. I don't have as much contact with her as I used to, but I don't believe that she works there anymore. And so what a blessing for her. But there are still plenty of people that work there that have to endure everything that you've seen in these episodes and now, are hearing about in this. And so before I read the Bible verses, I kind of feel, in my spirit that as far as this, season of episodes, when it comes to my experiences there, that those are probably coming to an end very soon. I don't know, how many more episodes there are, but I can kind of feel like, that's kind of coming to an end. But I also want to say that I believe that I'm going to start having guests on the podcast, and I would love to hear from you and hear if you're interested in being a guest on the podcast. And if you are, please send me a message, reach out to me via email or on social media, or some of you have my text or my phone number, so you can text me. Please reach out to me and let me know if you would like to be on the podcast and why, of course. And because I believe that's going to be the next season of episodes, is actually sitting down and talking with people and what their experiences were there and how they've overcome those, or maybe how they're still struggling with those, because I know that's definitely a thing. So please reach out. Please continue to follow the podcast and subscribe and like and all of those things, because it really is making a difference whether you see it or not. I believe that it's making a difference, and I know that it's helping a lot of people. So my first Bible verse and that I'm going to read, and it's a couple of verses, and then I'll read the second one as well. So the first Bible verse I'm going to read is Acts 20, and it's 28 through 30. And it says, "Keep watch over yourselves and all the flock of which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Be shepherds of the church of God, which he bought with his own blood. I know that after I leave, savage wolves will come in among you and will not spare the flock. Even from your own number, men will arise and distort the truth in order to draw away disciples after them." And, I try really hard, again, to always have as much grace and understanding that I can. But, if after everything that we've seen and we've heard, and what the Bible even says about these things, if the Acts 20, 28 through 30, if that's not talking about these church leaders that have a very privileged position of even being called a pastor and being able to have a flock that they actually lead, and they are so they live in so much disdain and have so much pride and so much ego that they care more about themselves and the amount of money that they make, rather than making sure that they are shepherding people correctly and loving people correctly and making sure that people are hearing the gospel and that they are actually being saved. To me, it just jumps off the page. We don't, the Bible has plenty of scriptures that talk about false teachers and exposing false teachers and what fruits of the Spirit look like. Look at those, and then look at the people that you're allowing to lead you and direct you and lord over you in some of these cases. And is that really what we're supposed to be doing? And you have to call that into question for your own self. But I know for me, it did, like I said, take a little bit of time for me to really grasp and understand everything that I had endured while working at World Harvest, and also what other people endured, and that we have to stand up for ourselves. We have to stand up for other people. And there's a way of doing it that is not disgraceful. Like, I know some people think that it's disgraceful to speak out against churches and church leaders. But at the end of the day, if they are teaching falsely and they are false prophets, somebody's got to say something. And that was always what my intent was that they knew that I knew it was not okay for them to be behaving this way. And although I still continue to pray for them, I want them to really recognize the error of their ways and that they have hurt a lot of people and they continue to hurt a lot of people. And the last verse that I have is Matthew 7:15 through 20. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit, you will recognize them. And I know that in one of the other episodes, I do use that scripture, but I think that it's very prevalent to continue to point out, again, what the scriptures say about the wolves that walk among us, the wolves that pretend and they look like sheep and they pretend to be sheep on the outside, but when you actually start looking inwardly and looking at the fruit and even getting a glimpse into what they are actually like behind closed doors, that this is signifying to us that we need to open our eyes and we need to open our ears, and that it is wrong for us to continue to pretend that these things do not exist. And I know that they probably exist a lot more places, unfortunately, in churches than just World Harvest Church. But this was my experience, and it taught me a lot. It made me a better person, but it also left a lot of scars and bruises on me. And I know that it did for a lot of other people as well. And that at the end of the day, it was my duty to stand up for what's right and stand up for the people. So thank you so much again for subscribing, liking, following the podcast. And again, please reach out to me and send me your messages if you are interested for season 2 of Mega Maniacs and being a guest on the podcast. Have a good evening.